We're continuing our series on women in the Bible. This morning we're thinking about Deborah and Jael, and you can read about that in Judges 4 to 5. We'll read from Judges 4 in a minute. But I thought it would be interesting to tell the story first. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard sermons on Judges, on Deborah before. But I wonder how many of you have heard Jael talked about. And it's interesting because it's in the same story, in the same chapter. A long time ago, in a country far, far away, lived the Israelites, and they had invaded the land of Canaan. And the period of the Judges comes after Joshua. When they'd invaded, they'd taken control of the land, it was theirs. And the book of Judges covers about 480 years. And we come to this bit in Judges chapter 4, and we read about, in fact, let me put this up and it'll make a bit more sense. So we read about Jabin, who's the king of Hazor. You probably can't see that, but is that going to work? It's not working, never mind. Right at the top there, you might be able to see the little blue line up at the top right, which is underlined Hazor. And if you can't see it, it's right at the top. So that's where Jabin lived. His commander, Sisera, who was the commander of the army, lived in a place that you can read on the screen that I'm not going to even try to pronounce. And thankfully I can get through the sermon without having to pronounce it, so it's fine. And he lived there. And it's interesting when you look at those two places, they're quite a long way apart. And so this was the kind of sphere or area that they were controlling at this time. So when the people of God had gone in and Joshua, God said to Joshua and his people, clear out the land, it's yours. Now, as I think when Tracy was talking about this a few months ago, she was saying that gives us problems, the kind of military nature of that. And it's not just the tell people that's your land, it's just the destructive nature of it bothers lots of us. But what we find out here in Judges, probably at this stage, a generation or two later, you've got this Canaanite king Jabin who's still reigning over this huge area in the north. So by no means was Joshua the extermination, the book of Joshua the extermination that it makes us out to be. And then you've got Deborah, and you might have seen the yellow line appear down there in the middle. She lived in Ephraim, near Bethel. And just to go back to Sisera, he was the commander of the army, and he was quite a clever fella. He had 900 iron chariots. And the Bible said he oppressed Israel for 20 years. He was the bully in the area. He turned up and took stuff. He acted in a destructive way. This was not a good person. And so Deborah, the prophet, was in Ephraim. And you'll notice how far south Ephraim is. And it's interesting to note that geographically, this was nothing to do with Deborah at all. She was in a completely different area. And so it's interesting to wonder why she became part of this at all. And so Deborah's there. She's a prophet. And what we read in Judges chapter 4, she sends for Barak, who's from Kadesh, and then you can see Kadesh. I'm not sure again if you can see the line that's appeared, the white line right at the top. So just above Hazor is Kadesh, right up at the north there. And she sends for him, and he comes all the way down to Ephraim. And I didn't measure it, but it must be in the region of 100 miles. And he travelled there. There's no car. This is like days of travelling. He's summoned by Deborah the prophet. So off he goes to Kadesh, and she says to him, it's time for you to go and put a stop to Jabin and Sisera. They've been oppressing Israel too long. Go. And Barak said, I will go, but only if you go with me. And so she says, that's fine, but the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of the woman as a result. And so Barak's army that he pulls together is from Naphtali and Zebulun. Again, whether you can see the lines or not, you can probably get the sense of that region. It's all happening up at the top in the north of Israel. And he gathers together these 10,000 warriors. So Barak was clearly a military leader, and he can go to these two tribes of Israel and say, I need 10,000 warriors. And they're like, yes, we're with you. But what he seemed to have lacked was any kind of spiritual depth. He didn't hear from God, or perhaps he did hear from God and he didn't want to do it, and he needed Deborah to go and tell him what to do. He needed God to speak through Deborah. And it's crazy in one way to think, he's travelling 100 miles or so south to be told by God what to do, to go back north and do it. And sometimes God's just a bit like that. Sometimes that's just God going, surprise! And sometimes there's more to it. You know, perhaps there was no one listening in the north. We don't quite know what that was all about. But we do know that Deborah was the prophet and the judge of the time. When we read the word judge in the book of Judges, it means leader. It doesn't mean like someone with a wig on who you call my lady or my lord or whatever it is. It's someone who was like a leader. And so she was the leader of the people, spiritual leader of Israel at the time. So Barak goes back, he summons his warriors, they go to Mount Tabor as God has instructed them, and as Sisera attacks with all his chariots and other troops, the Bible says God threw them into panic. Sisera escapes, he ends up in the tent of Jael, Jael, and again you can see where that is. Again, it's all in that region up at the top there, and he thinks he's with a friend, and so he says to her, I need to sleep. Can you watch out for me? And while he goes to sleep, she kills him. Do you want to know how? Really don't. She drives a tent peg through his temple. And it sounds really, ooh, that's not good. And I think what we need to remember is Sisera was someone who had oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. He had come and he'd murdered them and he'd taken their stuff and he'd made life difficult for them. And while she wasn't an Israelite herself, she was looking on thinking, this person has done wrong. Now in our culture, and I do need to say this now, if you drive a tent peg through someone's temple, that's really bad. Please don't do that. That's not what we're saying. Because we live in a world with law and order, and actually there are other routes towards justice. And it doesn't look much like justice, murdering someone, but I would say this is a form of justice that was suitable. Suitable? That's not the right word, is it? That was going to work, let's go with that, that was going to work in that culture in a way that you can't go to the police in this time in Israel and they sort it out. So let's just leave that there, however we feel about it. So let's now read the passage. And so you can see how some of that is spoken in the Bible's own words. So after Ehud's death, Ehud was the previous judge leader of Israel, the Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazor, a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in, I do have to say it, let's go with Harosheth Hagoyim. And in fact, what they taught us at theological college was no one knows how to pronounce these things, so just sound confident. There we go, it's a little tip of the trade there. Sisera, who had 900 iron chariots, ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, she was a prophet who was judging Israel at that time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites would go to her for judgment. One day she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam. It sounds like a dog or something, doesn't it? I summon you. And he is summoned. He lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali, and she said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun at Mount Tabor. And I will call out Sisera, commander of the Jabin's army, along with his chariots and warriors, to the Kishon Valley. There I'll give you victory over him. Barak told her, I will go, but only if you go with me. Very well, she replied, I will go with you. And I wonder if she muttered under her breath, wuss, or something like that at that point, but we don't know that. I will go with you, but you will receive no honour in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. At Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 warriors went up with him. Deborah also went with him. Now Heber the Kenite and descendant of Moses' brother-in-law, Hobab, had moved away from the other members of his tribe and pitched his tent by the oak of Zananim near Kadesh. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, he called for all 900 of his iron chariots and all of his warriors, and they marched over from the place they'd come from to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, get ready. This is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you. So Barak led his 10,000 warriors down the slopes of Mount Tabor into battle. When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and warriors into a panic. Sisera leaped down from his chariot and escaped on foot. Then Barak chased the chariots of the enemy all the way to Harosheth. I've said it. There we go. Killing all of Sisera's warriors. Not a single one was left alive. Meanwhile, Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because Heber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come into my tent, sir. Come in. Do not be afraid." So he went into her tent and she covered him with a blanket. "Please give me some water," he said. "I'm thirsty." So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him again. "Stand at the door of the tent," he told her. "If anyone comes and asks you if there's anything, say no." But when Sisera fell asleep from exhaustion, Jael quietly crept up to him with a hammer and a tent peg in her hand. Then she drove the tent peg through his temple and into the ground, and so he died. And when Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael went out to meet him. She said, "Come, and I will show you the man you are looking for." So he followed her into the tent and found Sisera lying there dead, with the tent peg through his temple. So on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king, and from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him. And then just the first verse of chapter 5, on that day afterwards, or that day of the victory, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. I'm not going to sing it for you this morning, but you can go and you can look at that. And I'll say more about the song just briefly in a minute, but we're not going to particularly look at that. So we thought about the geography, and I just find this really interesting that actually you're looking at a kind of 100-mile gap approximately between where Deborah lived and where all this went on. And make of that what you will. Did God want to involve this woman leader at a time when there weren't many prominent women leaders? Is God reminding his people of what's important, drawing her into something that she didn't need to be involved in? Was Barak not paying attention? Just make of that what you will. I just find it interesting that she gets drawn into this. And that the book of Judges, as much as it says the judge led Israel, it was a very geographical, regional thing. And you'll notice that if you flick through the Judges, you'll notice it talks about different tribes. And you can, if you can't see the map, you can look at it later on the video, or you can just Google it, maps of tribes of Israel. And it's usually quite a regional thing. So there's the geography. The second thing that I wanted to just talk about really briefly was this really interesting, this example in the Bible where you've got this chapter 4, which is the history, the factual account of what happened. And you've got chapter 5, which is the song about what happened. It's Deborah and Barak, the musical. And one of the things, I don't know, I'm not big into musicals, but I don't know. Let's say you've been to see the musical Hamilton, for example. Anyone been to see Hamilton? Oh, we're really not that sort of church, are we? Oh, yeah, perhaps we are. And I don't know, I'm not, but it's based on history, right? But I guess you don't watch it and think that's 100% historically accurate. They're definitely not. And I think it's a really helpful reminder of something we talked about a week or two ago, or 3, when we were talking about Genesis and what is Genesis 1 and is Genesis 1 poetry? Because in the Bible, when you read poetry, you don't take it literally. So I'll give you some examples from, and by the way, I'm not saying Genesis 1 is or isn't poetry. I'm just saying you have to make your mind up. Because when you read poetry, it's not literal. So you read Judges chapter 5, and from my place in my notes, it's not a literal translation. So Judges chapter 5 talks about the mountains quaking. Well, where did that happen? Judges 5 in the song talks about all the other tribes of Israel being too scared to take part. That's scandalous, isn't it? I'm reading that thinking, that's outrageous, that's a lie. Isn't that interesting? The Bible contains a lie. I'll say that out loud. It was interesting, isn't it? It doesn't sound right, does it? How do you equate those two things? And what is it? It's someone in a musical getting a bit excited. And we see it throughout the Psalms. It's very like David saying to God in one of the Psalms, God, why are you asleep? Does God sleep? And it's not that he's lying. Lying's the wrong word, and I withdraw it. I just so I don't get sad. It's someone in the emotion of a song singing something out that they feel but may not be true. And it's really interesting. If you look at Judges for yourself, later Judges 5, it's a really helpful example. of the difference between biblical history and biblical poetry. And history is there to say that's the way it happened, and poetry is there to inspire us about who God is. And there'll be more about this. We'll come back, circle round to this in a month or two, when we're going to do a few weeks thinking about how we read and interpret the Bible. So that was a bit of a trailer for what's to come ahead. But also, just to say briefly about Judges, then we'll get to Deborah. In the book of Judges, they go round in this circle where there's peace in the land, people rebel against God, the surrounding nations attack, then the people think, oh no, we're under attack, we better remember that God's here, and they shout things for help. And so God brazenly judges and rescues them, and there's peace in the land, and then they go round and round. Each cycle in Judges takes 40 years, and there are 12 cycles in the book of Judges. And for those of you who are amazing mathematicians, will realise that there's 480 years where the people of God go around in circles. And just imagine if for the next 480 years of your life, you went round in circles like this. And how does that make you feel? And I've got to confess, it really cheers me up as someone who gets stuff wrong, to know it's not just me. But it also makes me want to say, we've got to be better than them. There's got to be more than this. That together we can spur one another on to do better. So there we go. That's just like a mini sermon. And then we come to Deborah. I want to say a few things about Deborah and Jael. Firstly, Deborah was a trailblazer. Deborah was a female leader at a time when there weren't any female leaders. As we thought over the past 6 or 7 weeks, women were treated horrendously in the Bible. They were treated like property, they were treated like objects. It was absolutely awful. And it just must be weird for kind of this blokey bloke who's like all women are objects, and why was my tea not on the table at 5 o'clock when I got paid? And all that kind of thing, to think I need to hear from the Lord. And what do? I go to the prophet. Oh my goodness, the prophet's a woman. And it's just this kind of weird thing in someone's head. He's looking at this woman thinking, no, that's wrong. Women are inferior in his head. And God is reminding him that he is at work through women too. That we see the equality in Genesis chapter 1, that God created male and female in his image. Then we see in the fall, and the account of the fall, that there are consequences of the fall for men and women. And God's perfect creation of equality is spoiled. And I believe that in the cross at that time, God makes all things new. And I think we need to be continually drawn back to that place where churches are strong like women and men together. We hear what God is saying. And it's great when churches like this are very female friendly, we have women leaders and have done for many, many years, and we would talk to them and say, look at us go. And I don't know this for a fact, so I'm going to take a bit of a risk here. I wonder how much in the church, even like this one, it's very pro-women in ministry. I wonder how much we would have heard women preach from the front consistently at any point in that history. I'm sure we would have heard some, I'm not accusing of anything. I'm just saying that was true of me, the church I was leading. Very positive about women in leadership. Very proud of it. Until someone said to me, why do we never hear women preaching? I was like, ooh, challenging. Put your money where your mouth is. And it's been so encouraging, I think, to hear people and lots of the women in the church sharing. It's really blessed me. It's great. We need to hear and realise all aspects of ministry of the male and the female. Deborah's a trailblazer. She gets stuff done. And it's just amazing what she does. It says she was the wife of Lapinoth. And one of the confusing things about interpreting biblical Hebrew is the word wife and woman are the same. That's not very helpful, is it? So usually, when you translate it, you work it out by the context. So if it says, I don't know, it's talking about a husband and wife going for a walk, and it says Hebrew word of them, you think, well, it's a husband and wife going for a walk, it means wife. That makes sense. Whereas if it's talking about a single person going for a walk, you think, well, it means woman. And that's how you do it. Now, in Judges chapter 4, there's no indicator of whether it means woman or wife. But it's interesting, all the translations consistently go for wife. And I just wonder if there's something subliminal in this. There's just this, can't imagine this strong, independent woman. She must have a husband who looks after her. I don't quite know what it is, because there's just no way of knowing. that I can tell. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so perhaps others would view that differently. So there's Deborah, woman of God, getting things done, standing out at a time when women had no status and making a difference. And I look at this picture and I just think, I've sat on mountain tops. It's always better when you get on a ski lift, isn't it? Or get a lift up there. So it's just brilliant. We walked the Great Glen Way over Loch Ness, and some of you will have seen the picture I took down at Loch Ness on the hilltop up there. Absolutely beautiful. But the slope I walked up to get there, I would never walk up again. There's a parking spot about a mile past that viewpoint. That's about the same level. It's just so much easier to walk. You say, so which way are you going to go? I go there again. We go the easy way, don't we? I think many of us have this perception that Christianity is easy. Following Jesus is like going on a pleasure cruise. And we forget that Jesus comes to these disciples and he says, I will teach you how to fish for people. You see, he doesn't say, come and follow me and we'll have a nice time. He doesn't say, come and follow me and we'll land around. He says, come and follow me. It's going to be hard work. I don't think you've ever been fishing on a fishing boat with all nets, and I haven't, but it doesn't strike me as something that's particularly relaxing. That's hard work, isn't it? Come and follow me, and we'll do stuff together. And it will be hard along the way, but in it, you will be #blessed. #blessed. You will be blessed. The blessing of God with us. Deborah the trailblazer. People coming to see her and getting what they want. Hearing from the Lord, they would have said, you should go back in the kitchen. And she would have put up with all that kind of stuff. And she trailblazes, she stands out, she leads God's people. And it makes me wonder what God is calling us to. What is God calling us to? I sat and I listened to Rachel speak last week. And I just thought, I'd love to go to her church. You know, I'd love to sit in Rachel's church every week. And I'm not giving you a new job in this moment, by the way, because you're in a really important job, and I pray for you in the job. I just sat there and thought, I'm so inspired by this. This is really good stuff. Isn't that exciting just to hear from someone who wouldn't normally have at the front who's got amazing communicative skills? That's great, isn't it? That's the church we want to be part of, isn't it? We see some people stepping out and beliefs. Deborah the trailblazer. Second thing about Deborah, this isn't necessarily a picture of Deborah. I just think it's another Rachel actually, but I don't think it's Rachel either. But same kind of hair. Obstacles. And so Deborah, as a woman in this culture, would have faced obstacles. Alone, criticised, odd, imposter syndrome, that should I be the leader? How did she overcome that stuff? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us. We don't know how she overcame. And so what I've done, I've gathered up some quotes here that I'm about to put on the screen, things that have been said in Baptist churches to female ministers. These are all genuinely 100% true. That's not the church I want to be part of. How will you fit in your household? Is that your stripper code? I guess God could use a woman if young men are not being raised up. You won't be able to preside at communion during the period. Congratulations, you preach just like a man. You almost convince me that women can preach. One day you get married and give up ministry so you can stay at home and have children. The skirt is too short. It was the factory correction. It distracts my husband. I think he needs to listen to some of our preaching series we've just been through. We need a male minister to relate to the young men in the church. I can never vote for you with the women should be ministers. You're too good looking to be a minister. At college, having taken my first travel service, one of the tutors came up to me and said, "Great legs." For a 20-year jumper, your husband wouldn't stand a chance. So I enjoy looking at your shoes, perhaps I should be concentrating. Maybe the same. It's not the church you want to be part of. Okay, that's the church at its worst. I'm sure it's not that bad all the time. But these are the unspoken attitudes. I think these are the reasons why we don't have many women preachers in our churches. It's just factually, if you think of all the churches you've been part of, unless you have a female minister, you probably would struggle to think of many churches historically where there'd be more than, say, 4 or 5 women preaching in a year, and that would be unusual. And I just want to say, just enough. Enough. We need to hear from people of all genders, of all ethnicities, of all ages. We're the church. We're the church, and we've got to hear what God is saying through all his people. And we've got to make space for that. Thinking about the obstacles and how we overcome. Thinking about being underestimated. We come onto Jael then, and her tent peg. Never go into the tent of a woman with a tent peg. I'm not sure how you get through that if you go to your line and those sorts of things. All the tent pegs packed away, that'd be a good question. Jael, like so many women in Scripture, underestimated. Sisera goes in, he thinks he's safe, and it doesn't end well for him. We've been thinking about Jenny Ford's artwork, and this is her painting of Jael, described as the most blessed of women in Judges 5:34. That's in the song, so it's not theologically necessarily true, but it sounds pretty good to me. Jael plays a key role in Israel's war with the Canaanites. I'm going to read out what Jen said about the picture. All the words aren't on the screen. Jael is actually one of my favourites of the women that I've painted. There's so much bloodthirsty, dark drama and power within the story, which is amazingly all centred around the women, which I find fascinating. Jael is a calculated assassin, and I painted her as such. This is essentially the story of a man's cowardice and the woman going ahead and just getting the job done. In Judges 4, we read that Barak the warrior would not follow God's orders and attack Sisera's army without physical backing of Deborah the prophet. Because of his fear, Deborah prophesied that Sisera would indeed be delivered into the hands of a woman, not Barak. Whether Jael was inspired by God to murder Sisera or just saw an opportunity and took matters into her own hands, she's no doubt been a ruthless and powerful woman. I painted her mid-murder. Love that phrase. Painted her mid-murder. Because this is the juiciest part of Jael's story. That's brilliant. I love that. There is something strangely alluring and strangely psychotic about a woman calling a man into a tent, promising him protection. Come in, Lord, don't be afraid. Calmly tucking him up in bed to rest from the exhausting battle, then quietly dispatching him. This wasn't just any murder either. She took a tent peg, drove it through his head and fastened him to the ground. He ran away from his dying army. He won't run away again. What strength of both arm and stomach she would have needed. Jael is one extraordinary woman. It's quite a graphic description. It leaves me a little bit uncomfortable. And it's interesting that for an artist, when I've done icon paint, machine paint. Sometimes when I'm trying to process something, I'll create something visual on a computer. It helps me tune in to what's going on in the story. It helps me to think about it. And I think you can see in the description here how much Jan has really tuned in to the kind of horror and the brutality of the story and the way that God was working in that circumstance. Women in the Bible were mistreated, and we discovered that. It's brilliant in this story to see 2 women who acted in a countercultural way. They were going to make things different, like Esther, we thought about last week, using her power and influence to make a difference. And it's relevant to more marginalised groups, isn't it? We want to see more women at work in God's work. We want to see people of all races and ethnicity at work. I grew up, and I've shared this before, but I'm going to say it again for emphasis. I grew up in Wolverhampton in the 1990s. I was a teenager. And someone came to our church and said one Sunday, do you know you're the only church in Wolverhampton that has a multicultural leadership? And it blew me away, because you could have walked into any church in Wolverhampton and you would have seen people with different coloured skin around the congregation. That's just naturally a place like that. but we were the only church that didn't have an all-white leadership. Try not to start again. And it's just not right, is it? It's just not right. Unless the church is all white, it's just not right. Or age, I started in ministry age 23, 2 or 3 years ago. I thought I was too young, but God had other plans. When will we realise that God wants us to hear from different voices that are different perspectives, so that we learn more? God opens the way, we're nearly finished. God opens the way, brings the victory. Deborah's faith creates this amazing story. I'd love to know what Deborah was doing in all this. We don't hear anything about Deborah again. She says, Darren, go and get on with it. And he said, I'm not going with that. She goes, all right, come with you. And then we don't know what her role was or what it was all about. We don't know what went on. But because of her, it's all kicked off. It all makes a difference. Because of Jael, the person who was inflicting pain and suffering on so many people, is taken away. But it was all to do with God. God gave the victory. And for many of us, and particularly if you've ever felt oppressed or struggling or any of those things, you think it's just me. What can I do in this situation? And do you know what the Bible says? It says God's power is made perfect when you've got everything under control. No, it doesn't say that, does it? God's power is made perfect in your weakness. So in a moment where you're standing and you're looking around thinking, I'm helpless in this situation, you're in the best spot, biblically. God's power can work when you say to God, you know, God, I can't manage. What are we going to do? You've got to help me out here. We've got to do something. God opens the way. And how about you? What's the difference that God is going to make in your life from what we've talked about this morning? Are you a trailblazer? What God is calling you to do? It may not be something grandiose. How is God calling you to be an influencer, like Esther? What are the obstacles we're facing that are holding us back? How do people underestimate? Will we rely on God? And how about you? Do we want to be the church that says to women, tough, know your place? Or do we want to be the church that says to women, and people from different cultures, and people of all ages, and people who are disabled, and people who you rarely see in leadership positions, be tough with God's strength and become all that you created. He created you to be. I finish with a story. It's the parable of the undefeated wrestler, which I think I've read to you before. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Bonus. There we go. I was going to read it again anyway, but that's just good to know. There once was a wrestler who was undefeated. They were not the strongest or the fastest, but they never backed down. And they had the scars to prove it. They were the undefeated wrestler, and they were came. Their opponents would gang up on them and try to defeat them. But every time the wrestler was knocked down, they would get to their feet again and carry on. Because they were the undefeated wrestler. They could cope. Their pride would cause them to grin if it wasn't too painful to do so. But they were the undefeated wrestler, and they could cope. One day they were ambushed by several other wrestlers, and as they fell to the ground, having been attacked, there was a crunch. Realising their leg was broken, they stood up anyway, because they were the undefeated wrestler, and they could cope with anything. The wrestler stood up, balancing on one leg. "Come on, you'll never beat me," she screamed. She was the undefeated wrestler, and she could cope. And as the first person hit her, she fell backwards. And as her head was about to hit the canvas, she saw her hand stretched out towards her. And she remembered she was in a tag team. Out of desperation, nothing else she could do, she reached out, tagged her partner, who leapt into the ring and shouted, I forget, they whispered, "Boo." And everyone else went away. As she lay on the mat, it occurred to her she was still undefeated. She thought about getting back in the ring as soon as possible. But then she realised she would be doing the same with her teammates. What would be different? She was the undefeated wrestler, and let me finish that sentence yourself. Let's just think about what we've been talking about. What is God saying to us this morning about the obstacles we face and what He's calling us to? It may be that there's someone here and you're thinking, gosh, perhaps God might be calling me to minister in the church. And you never would have seen yourself that way before. And I think the key is, whether it's to do with leadership in a church or leadership in the world, either way we offer spiritual leadership. It doesn't matter where we serve. But the thing is that we let God enable us to be who we are in those circumstances. As we trailblaze, as we overcome obstacles, as we don't let people define us by their own estimation. We rely on God. Let's just be still for a moment. I pray that you would help us now as we sing these songs to use this space to communicate with you, to realise you're with us. God, we pray that your voice would speak to us individually about who we are, about our lives, about what we're facing. Thank you for the reminder, God, that you are with us all.